bridge appears on no map. The protagonist learned this truth on the first night of work, when the supervisor handed over a folder thick with yellowed papers and rules written in fading ink. The supervisor did not smile. The supervisor did not offer reassurance. The supervisor simply placed the folder on the metal desk between them and said that the bridge needed someone new, someone who would follow instructions without asking why. The protagonist had needed work desperately. The bills had piled up like autumn leaves, suffocating and endless. When the job listing appeared, buried deep in a website that looked like it had not been updated since the early days of the internet, the pay seemed too good to question. Maintenance work on a bridge. Night shifts only. No experience necessary. The isolation did not bother the protagonist. Isolation seemed preferable to the constant noise of the city, the demanding voices, the expectations that crushed like stones. The bridge itself stood at the end of a road that twisted through dense forest. The trees grew so thick on either side that their branches formed a tunnel of shadows. The protagonist drove this road for the first time just after sunset, watching as the last rays of daylight were swallowed by the canopy overhead. The road was not marked on any GPS. The directions in the folder were written by hand, each turn described in careful detail. Left at the lightning-scarred oak. Right where the road forks at the boulder, shaped like a sleeping bear, straight through where the pavement turns to gravel. The bridge came into view slowly, emerging from the mist that clung to the ground like something alive. It was a suspension bridge, though not particularly long, maybe 300 feet from end to end. The cables were old, covered in rust that looked black in the fading light. The deck was made of metal grating that hummed when the wind passed through. On either side, the guardrails were painted a faded red that might have been vibrant once, decades ago. Below the bridge, there was nothing. Not water, not a ravine, just fog that moved with purpose, swirling in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The maintenance shed stood at the near end of the bridge, a small structure made of corrugated metal that rattled in the breeze. Inside, the protagonist found a cot, a space heater that glowed orange when plugged in, and a metal locker that contained tools, wrenches, screwdrivers, a flashlight with batteries that still worked, a coil of rope, a hammer, a bucket, a first aid kit, and a radio that was tuned to a frequency that produced only static. On the wall, someone had hung a clipboard with blank inspection sheets. Beneath the clipboard, written directly on the metal wall in black permanent marker, were the rules. Rule 1. Begin each shift by walking the length of the bridge exactly once. Do not stop. Do not look down into the fog for longer than a moment. Count the support cables as you walk. There should be 22 on each side. If there are more, do not acknowledge the extras. If there are fewer, report it in the logbook immediately, and do not leave the shed until dawn. Rule 2. The bridge will make sounds throughout the night. creaking, groaning, the metallic hum of cables under tension. These sounds are normal. If you hear footsteps that are not your own, stop moving and stand perfectly still. Do not turn around. Wait until the footsteps pass. They will always pass. Rule 3. You may encounter travelers attempting to cross the bridge. Most will ignore you. Some will greet you. Be polite but brief. Do not offer assistance. Do not accept anything they try to give you. If a traveler stops in the middle of the bridge and refuses to move, return to the shed and wait. They will be gone by morning. Rule 4. Every 2 hours, check the tension of the main cables using the gauge kept in the locker. The reading should be between 60 and 70. If the reading drops below 60, tighten the turnbuckles at the base of the eastern tower. If the reading exceeds 70, loosen them. If the gauge reads 0 or above 100, leave the bridge immediately and do not return for 3 full days. Rule 5. Lights will sometimes appear in the fog below. Small, flickering, like candles carried by invisible hands. Do not investigate. Do not call out to them. If the lights begin to rise toward the bridge deck, turn on the floodlights mounted on the towers. The lights below will retreat. If the floodlights do not turn on, leave the bridge immediately. Rule 6. You will hear voices. They will sound familiar. They may sound like family, friends, people you have lost. The voices will call your name. They will beg for help. They will sound desperate, afraid, hurt. Ignore them. They are not real. Responding to the voices, even once, will make them stronger. Rule 7. If you see someone standing at the far end of the bridge, someone who was not there a moment before, do not approach them. Continue your work as normal. They will leave when they are ready. If they begin walking toward you, retreat to the shed and lock the door. Do not open the door until you hear the church bells. Rule 8. There are no churches within 50 miles of the bridge. You will hear the bells anyway. Rule 9. Animals do not cross this bridge. If you see an animal on the bridge, it is not an animal. Move away from it calmly. Do not run. Running triggers a chase response. If it follows you into the shed, use the salt kept in the bottom drawer of the locker. Pour a line of salt across the threshold. It will not cross. Rule 10. Once per night, at an unpredictable time, the fog below will clear entirely. You will be able to see what lies beneath the bridge. When this happens, close your eyes immediately. Keep them closed until you hear the fog return. The sound of the fog returning is like breathing, deep and slow. What lies beneath the bridge is not meant to be seen. Rule 11. Your shift ends at dawn. Dawn is defined as the moment the first ray of sunlight touches the eastern tower. Do not leave before this happens. Do not remain after this happens. There is a window of approximately 2 minutes. Use it. Rule 12. If you break any of these rules, you may not notice the consequences immediately. The bridge is patient. The bridge remembers. Pay attention to small changes, shadows that fall in the wrong direction. The the sound of your own breathing coming from somewhere else, a sense of being watched that does not fade. If you notice these things, you have already made a mistake. Correct it however you can. The protagonist read these rules 3 times before the first shift began. Some part of the protagonist wanted to laugh, to dismiss them as an elaborate prank, a test to see if the new hire would take the job seriously. But the supervisor had not been joking. The supervisor had looked tired, worn down, like someone who had seen too much and wanted only to forget. The first walk across the bridge happened at midnight. The protagonist stepped onto the metal grating and felt it shift slightly underfoot, settling with a low groan. The fog below was thick, moving in slow spirals. The support cables stretched upward into the darkness, disappearing into a sky that had no stars. The protagonist began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. The cables were evenly spaced, each one emerging from the deck and curving up toward the towers. 22 on the left, 22 on the right. The count was correct. Halfway across, the protagonist made the mistake of looking down. The fog was closer than it should have been, rising almost to the level of the deck. Shapes moved within it, half-formed and indistinct. A hand reaching upward, a face turning toward the light. The protagonist looked away quickly, heart hammering, and continued walking. The far end of the bridge was empty. No travelers, no figures waiting, just the dark mouth of the road disappearing into the forest. The walk back was faster. The protagonist kept eyes forward, focusing on the shed, the promise of walls, and a door that locked. Inside, the heater glowed, filling the small space with warmth. The protagonist sat on the cot and tried to steady shaking hands. It was just fog, just shapes created by light and shadow and an overactive imagination. Nothing more. The first cable check happened at 2 in the morning. The gauge was a simple device, a dial with a needle that swung to indicate tension. The protagonist attached it to the main cable on the western side and watched the needle settle at 65, normal, safe. The eastern side read the same. The protagonist made a note in the logbook, recording the time and the readings, and returned to the shed. At 3:30, the footsteps began. The protagonist was sitting on the cot, trying to read a book brought from home, when the sound echoed across the bridge. Steady, deliberate, the strike of boots on metal grating. The protagonist froze, the book forgotten. The footsteps grew louder, closer. They were coming from the far end, moving toward the shed. The protagonist remembered the rule. Stop moving. Stand perfectly still. Do not turn around. The protagonist stood, facing the wall, barely breathing. The footsteps reached the entrance of the shed. They paused. The protagonist could feel a presence, something standing just outside, waiting. The air grew cold. The heater flickered. Then the footsteps continued, passing by the shed, moving toward the near end of the bridge. They faded slowly, swallowed by distance and fog. The protagonist did not move for a full minute after the sound disappeared. The first traveler appeared at 4:15. The protagonist was outside, checking the bolts that secured the guardrail to the deck, when a figure emerged from the mist at the far end. It was a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, a long coat that reached her ankles, a hat with a wide brim. She walked slowly, steadily, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. The protagonist straightened, uncertain. The woman drew closer. As she passed, she glanced at the protagonist and nodded, a small gesture of acknowledgement. The protagonist nodded back, then returned to work. The woman continued across the bridge and disappeared into the forest on the near side. The protagonist did not see where she went. One moment she was there, the next she was gone, as if the trees had swallowed her whole. At 6, the protagonist heard the voices for the first time. They were faint, rising from the fog below, a man calling a name the protagonist did not recognize. A child laughing, high and bright. A woman singing something wordless and sad. The protagonist gripped the wrench tighter and focused on the task at hand. The voices grew louder, more insistent. They began to overlap, creating a chorus that was almost hypnotic. The protagonist caught fragments of words. "Help us. Please. We are lost. Come down. Come find us." The protagonist closed eyes, took a deep breath, and waited. After several minutes, the voices faded, retreating back into the depths below. Dawn came as a pale line on the horizon, growing slowly brighter. The protagonist stood at the edge of the bridge, watching the eastern tower, waiting for the first ray of sunlight. When it came, it struck the metal like a bell, bright and sudden. The protagonist grabbed the small bag brought for the shift, locked the shed, and walked quickly to the car parked on the gravel road. The drive back through the forest felt longer than it had the night before. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches scraping the roof of the car. By the time the protagonist reached the main road, the sun was fully up, and the world looked normal again. The second night was worse. The protagonist arrived at sunset, parked in the same spot, and walked to the shed with a sense of dread that had not been there before. The bridge looked the same. The fog looked the same, but something felt different, as if the bridge itself was aware, watching, waiting to see what the protagonist would do. The first walk across revealed 23 cables on the left side. The protagonist counted twice to be sure. 23, one extra. The protagonist did not look at the extra cable, did not acknowledge it, just continued walking, counting the right side. 22, correct. The protagonist finished the walk, returned to the shed, and made a note in the logbook. 23 cables on west side. Continuing shift as normal. The tension readings were normal. 66 on the west, 64 on the east. The protagonist recorded the numbers and tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. It was constant now, a prickling sensation at the back of the neck, a certainty that something was standing just out of sight. At 1 in the morning, the lights appeared. Small flickering points in the fog, dozens of them, spread out like a constellation. The protagonist saw them from the bridge deck and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The lights began to move, drifting upward, rising toward the bridge. The protagonist ran to the eastern tower, found the switch for the floodlights, and flipped it. The lights mounted on both towers blazed to life, casting harsh white illumination across the bridge and down into the fog. The flickering points below retreated immediately, sinking back into the depths. The protagonist left the floodlights on for 10 minutes before turning them off. The battery that powered them was not infinite. It needed to be conserved. At 2:30, a traveler stopped in the middle of the bridge. He was an older man wearing a suit that looked decades out of date. He stood perfectly still, facing the fog, his hands clasped behind his back. The protagonist watched from the shed, uncertain. Minutes passed. The man did not move. The protagonist remembered the rule: do not approach. Return to the shed and wait. The protagonist was already in the shed. There was nothing to do but wait. An hour later, the man was gone. The protagonist did not see him leave. One moment he was there, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the fog. The next moment, the bridge was empty. The voices came earlier on the second night, starting just after 3. This time, they were louder, more distinct. The protagonist heard a voice that sounded like a mother, a woman who had passed years ago. The voice called the protagonist by name, using a nickname that no one else had ever used. It begged the protagonist to come closer, to help, to please just listen. The protagonist sat on the cot, hands pressed over ears, eyes squeezed shut, and waited for the voices to stop. They did not stop for over an hour. At 5, the fog cleared. The protagonist was outside, replacing a bolt that had worked itself loose from the guardrail, when the swirling mist below simply vanished. It happened in an instant, like a curtain pulled away. The protagonist looked down reflexively and saw what lay beneath. The protagonist saw and understood immediately why the rule existed. The protagonist slammed eyes shut, turned away, and pressed back against the guardrail, gasping. The image was burned into memory. Shapes that were not shapes, movement that defied physics, colors that had no name, and the sense, overwhelming and undeniable, that what lay beneath was aware, that it had seen the protagonist in return, and that it was pleased. The fog returned with the sound of breathing, deep and slow, exactly as the rules had described. The protagonist kept eyes closed until the sound faded, then stumbled back to the shed and sat on the cot, shaking. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. The protagonist went through the motions, checking cables, recording readings, but the mind was elsewhere, replaying what had been seen, trying and failing to make sense of it. Dawn came as a relief. The protagonist locked the shed, got in the car, and drove home on autopilot. Sleep was impossible. Every time eyes closed, the image returned. The protagonist called in sick to the next shift, then the one after that, but the bills were still there, and the money from the bridge job was the only thing keeping the walls from closing in. After 3 nights away, the protagonist returned. The supervisor was waiting at the shed. This had not happened before. The supervisor looked older than the protagonist remembered, more worn. The supervisor asked if everything was all right. The protagonist lied and said yes. The supervisor nodded slowly, then handed over a new page of rules, handwritten on paper that looked even older than the first set. Additional guidelines for experienced maintenance personnel. Read carefully. Rule 13. If the bridge begins to sway without wind, secure yourself to the nearest support cable using the rope in the locker. The swaying will stop after several minutes. Do not attempt to leave the bridge while it is moving. You will not reach the end. Rule 14. Objects may appear on the bridge that were not there before. A suitcase, a bicycle, a child's toy. Do not touch them. Do not move them. They will be gone by morning. Rule 15. If you find writing on the bridge that you did not write, do not read it. Cover it with tape from the locker or paint over it with the spray paint in the bottom drawer. Some messages are not meant to be received. Rule 16. You may feel the urge to jump. This urge will be sudden and powerful, unlike anything you have felt before. If this happens, sit down immediately. Grip the metal grating with both hands. Focus on the texture, the cold, the reality of it. The urge will pass. It always passes. Rule 17. Do not bring a camera. Do not take photographs. The bridge does not allow itself to be recorded. Attempting to do so will result in equipment failure at best. Rule 18. If you see yourself on the bridge, do not approach. Do not speak to it. Your double will mimic your movements for a time, then diverge. When it diverges, return to the shed and do not come out until dawn. If your double tries to enter the shed, refer to Rule 9. Rule 19. The logbook must be maintained. Every shift, every reading, every anomaly. If you miss an entry, go back and fill it in as soon as you remember. The logbook is a record, but it is also a protection. It proves you were here, that you followed the rules, that you are real. Rule 20. You will be offered a choice eventually. The bridge will make it clear what the choice is. Think carefully before you answer. There is no going back once the choice is made. The protagonist read the new rules and felt something settle in the chest, cold and heavy. The supervisor watched with eyes that held too much knowledge. The protagonist asked what the choice was. The supervisor shook head slowly. That is different for everyone, the supervisor said. You will know it when it comes. Then the supervisor left, walking into the forest on a path the protagonist had not noticed before, and the shift began. Weeks passed. the protagonist fell into a rhythm, a routine that made the strangeness almost bearable. The extra cable appeared and disappeared at random. Sometimes 22, sometimes 23, once 24. The protagonist stopped counting after the first walk and simply noted the number in the logbook. The travelers became familiar. The woman in the long coat passed every few nights, always at the same slow pace, always offering the same small nod. The man in the suit appeared less frequently, sometimes stopping in the middle, sometimes walking all the way across without pause. New travelers came and went. A young boy carrying a lantern, an elderly couple holding hands, a figure in a hooded cloak that might not have been human at all. The voices never stopped, but the protagonist learned to tune them out, to let them become background noise, no more significant than the wind or the creaking of the cables. The lights in the fog appeared regularly, and the protagonist became efficient at activating the floodlights, chasing them back down before they rose too high. The fog cleared twice more, and both times the protagonist kept eyes closed, waiting for the sound of breathing to signal its return. On the 43rd night, the bridge began to sway. There was no wind. The air was perfectly still, but the bridge moved, rocking gently from side to side, the cables singing with tension. The protagonist grabbed the rope from the locker and tied it around waist, securing the other end to the nearest support cable. The swaying increased, growing stronger, until the protagonist had to grip the guardrail to stay upright. The metal grating beneath feet shifted and groaned. The towers creaked. The fog below churned violently, as if something massive was moving through it. The protagonist closed eyes and held on. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the swaying stopped. The bridge settled with a long, low groan. The protagonist untied the rope with shaking hands and returned it to the locker. On the 51st night, the protagonist found a suitcase in the middle of the bridge. It was old leather, with brass buckles that gleamed in the dim light. The protagonist walked past it without stopping, without looking at it directly. By morning, it was gone. On the 67th night, words appeared on the metal grating, scratched deep into the surface. The protagonist saw them during the first walk and immediately returned to the shed for the tape. The words were covered before they could be read. Layers of thick tape pressed down until the scratches were hidden. The protagonist did not think about what the message might have said. On the 72nd night, the urge came. The protagonist was standing at the midpoint of the bridge, checking a cable, when the thought arrived, fully formed. Jump. The urge was overwhelming, a certainty that jumping was the right thing, the only thing, the thing that needed to happen right now. The protagonist sat down hard, gripping the grating with both hands, feeling the cold metal bite into palms. The urge screamed. The protagonist focused on the pain, the sharpness of it, the physical reality. Slowly, the urge faded, retreating like a tide. protagonist sat on the grating for 20 minutes, breathing hard, before standing up and continuing the shift. On the 88th night, the protagonist saw the double. It was standing at the far end of the bridge, illuminated by the faint glow of the fog. It looked exactly like the protagonist. Same clothes, same posture, same expression. The protagonist froze. The double raised a hand in greeting. The protagonist did not respond. The double began to walk across the bridge, mirroring the protagonist's stance, movements synchronized perfectly. Then, halfway across, the double stopped. It tilted its head, as if listening to something. It smiled. The smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. The protagonist backed toward the shed, not taking eyes off the double. The double watched, still smiling. The protagonist reached the shed, stepped inside, and locked the door. The double stood outside for the rest of the night. The protagonist could hear it moving occasionally, footsteps circling the shed, but it never tried to enter. At dawn, it was gone. On the 99th night, the choice was offered. The protagonist was sitting in the shed, recording the tension readings in the logbook, when the feeling came. It was not a voice, not words, but a knowing that settled into the mind, like something that had always been there. The bridge had a question. The bridge wanted to know if the protagonist would stay, not just for another shift, not just for another week. Stay permanently. Become part of the bridge, part of the structure, part of the thing that kept it standing. In exchange, the protagonist would never have to worry again. No bills, no hunger, no fear. Just existence, endless and unchanging, woven into the cables and the fog and the space between. The protagonist sat very still, feeling the weight of the offer. It would be easy to say yes. So easy. The world outside the bridge had nothing to offer but struggle and pain. Here, there was purpose. Here, there was a place. The protagonist thought about the supervisor, about the tiredness in those eyes, the sense of someone who had carried too much for too long. The protagonist thought about the travelers, about where they came from and where they went. The protagonist thought about what lay beneath the bridge, about the thing that watched and waited. The protagonist wrote a single word in the logbook. No. The feeling retreated immediately, pulling back like a hand withdrawn. The air in the shed grew warmer. The oppressive weight that had been building for weeks lifted slightly. The protagonist sat back, exhaling slowly. The choice had been made. There would be consequences, probably, but they would come later. For now, the shift continued. Dawn arrived on schedule. The protagonist locked the shed, walked to the car, and drove away. The bridge receded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by fog and trees. The protagonist did not know if there would be another shift. The logbook had been maintained. The rules had been followed. The choice had been made. Whatever came next would come. 3 days later, a message arrived, a letter handwritten, delivered by a postal service that should not have known the address. Inside was a single sentence. Your replacement begins next week. Thank you for your service." There was no signature. The protagonist folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. The final shift came on a night when the moon was dark and the stars were hidden by clouds. The protagonist arrived at the bridge with a sense of finality, a knowledge that this was the end. The shed looked the same. The bridge looked the same. But something fundamental had changed. The protagonist could feel it, a shift in the air, a loosening of tension. The first walk across was uneventful. 22 cables on each side. The fog below was calm, barely moving. No travelers appeared. No voices called out. The tension readings were normal. The night passed in a silence that felt almost peaceful. At dawn, the protagonist stood at the edge of the bridge and watched the sun rise. The light touched the eastern tower, bright and warm. The protagonist picked up the bag, locked the shed for the last time, and walked to the car. As the protagonist drove away, something appeared in the rearview mirror. A figure standing at the entrance to the shed. The new maintenance worker, probably. The protagonist did not stop. The protagonist did not look back. The bridge remains. It always remains. It will be there long after everyone who has ever walked across it is gone. It exists in the space between, in the fog and the silence and the dark. It needs someone to maintain it, someone to follow the rules, someone to make the choice when the time comes. There is always someone willing. There is always someone desperate enough. The protagonist found new work eventually. Normal work in a normal place with normal hours and normal pay. The bills still piled up, but they were manageable. The nights were quiet. Sleep came easier. But sometimes, in the space between waking and dreaming, the protagonist heard the sound of footsteps on metal grating. Sometimes, the protagonist smelled the fog, thick and cold and moving with purpose. Sometimes, the protagonist wondered about the new maintenance worker, about whether they had read the rules, about whether they would say no when the choice was offered. The bridge does not appear on any map, but it is there, waiting. It is always waiting. And somewhere, someone is walking across it right now, counting cables, checking tension, following rules they do not understand. They hear the voices calling from below. They see the lights rising through the fog. They feel the weight of the offer settling into their mind. And soon, very soon, they will have to choose. The protagonist chose to leave. The protagonist chose the struggle and the pain and the uncertainty of the world outside. But the bridge remembers. The bridge is patient. And if the protagonist ever becomes desperate enough again, if the bills pile too high and the walls close in too tight, the bridge will be there. The job listing will appear on a website that looks like it has not been updated in years. The pay will be too good to question, and the choice will be offered again. Some doors, once opened, never fully close. Some places, once known, can never be forgotten. The bridge is one of those places. It exists in the corners of memory, in the shadows of dreams, in the moments between heartbeats. It is real, it is waiting, and it will always need someone to maintain it. The fog rolls in as the sun sets. The cables hum with tension, the metal grating shifts and groans. Somewhere, a traveler steps onto the bridge, moving from one unknown place to another. Somewhere, a maintenance worker checks the logbook and records the readings. Somewhere, a choice is being made. The bridge endures, the bridge persists, the bridge remains. And those who have walked across it, those who have kept it standing, those who have looked into the fog and seen what lies beneath, they carry it with them always. It becomes part of them, woven into their thoughts, their dreams, their understanding of what is real and what is possible. The protagonist lives a normal life now, but normal is a relative term. Normal means waking up at 3 in the morning, certain that footsteps are echoing in the hallway. Normal means seeing fog and feeling a pull, a call, a summons that cannot be answered. Normal means knowing that there are places in the world that do not follow the rules, that exist outside of maps and logic and reason. The protagonist does not talk about the bridge. Who would believe it? Who would understand? It is easier to stay silent, to carry the knowledge alone, to live with the memory of what was seen and heard and felt. The protagonist has tried to find the bridge again, driving through forests, following roads that twist and turn, searching for the lightning-scarred oak and the boulder shaped like a sleeping bear. But the bridge does not want to be found. Not yet. Not until it is needed. Years pass. The memory fades at the edges, becoming less sharp, less immediate, but it never disappears entirely. The protagonist still hears the voices sometimes, still sees the lights in peripheral vision, still feels the urge to jump when standing on high places. These are the echoes, the remnants of time spent in a place that was not quite real. The protagonist has a theory. It is not a good theory, not one that brings comfort, but it is a theory nonetheless. The bridge is a threshold, a crossing point between what is and what could be. It exists because it must exist, because there are things that need to move from one side to the other, and the bridge is the only way across. The maintenance workers are not there to keep the bridge standing. They are there to witness, to acknowledge, to prove that the bridge is real by their presence. They are the anchor, the tether, the thing that keeps the bridge from slipping entirely into the fog. This theory does not explain everything. It does not explain the travelers, or the voices, or what lies beneath. But it is enough. It gives shape to the experience, makes it something that can be contained and filed away. The protagonist wonders about the others who have worked the bridge. How many have there been? Dozens? Hundreds? Do they live normal lives now, carrying the same secret, the same knowledge? Or did some of them say yes when the choice was offered? Are they part of the bridge now, woven into the structure, existing forever in the space between? There is no way to know. The bridge keeps its secrets. The bridge does not give answers. It only offers choices, and those choices have consequences that ripple outward in ways that cannot be predicted. The protagonist is older now. The years have accumulated like dust, settling into the corners of life. There are new bills, new struggles, new reasons to keep moving forward. But the memory of the bridge remains vivid and sharp, a reminder that the world is stranger than it appears, that there are places where the rules do not apply, where the impossible becomes routine. On quiet nights, when the world is still and the darkness presses close, the protagonist thinks about the new maintenance worker. Are they still there? Have they learned to ignore the voices? Have they faced the choice? Did they say no, or did they stay? There is no way to know. The bridge does not allow for reunions or explanations. It simply is, and those who encounter it must make their own peace with what they have experienced. The protagonist has made that peace, more or less. It is an uneasy peace, built on acceptance rather than understanding, but it is enough. Life continues. The sun rises and sets. The bills are paid. The world turns, and somewhere, in a forest that is not on any map, a bridge stands in the fog, waiting for the next person who is desperate enough to take the job, to follow the rules, to make the choice. The protagonist will not go back. The protagonist has chosen, and the choice is final. But the bridge remains, as it always has, as it always will. And that is enough. That is all there is. The story ends here, but the bridge does not end. The bridge never ends. It persists beyond narrative, beyond explanation, beyond understanding. It is a fact, as real as the ground beneath your feet, as certain as the darkness that comes when you close your eyes. And if you ever find yourself on a road that is not on any map, driving through a forest where the trees lean in too close, following directions written in fading ink, remember the rules. Follow them exactly. Do not deviate. Do not question. And when the choice is offered, think carefully. There is no going back. The bridge is waiting. The bridge is always waiting, and it needs someone to maintain it. Perhaps that someone is you.